simply to enroll a large pool of seniors. The company has set its prices.
TV news worked. Mike Wallace is in town for a talk tonight. We'll give you the details on that in a bit. The starting point for the conversation will be his new memoir, Between You and Me, which is just out. Along with winning the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award and the Robert E. Sherwood Award, Mike Wallace has earned 3 DuPont Awards and 3 Peabody Awards. This is the rough equivalent of 10 Oscars. I could read from the landslide of praise for the book and for Mike Wallace himself, but I'll limit myself to this from Tom Brokaw. He's the youngest old man I know. If you want to talk with Mike Wallace this hour, we're at 800-933-5372. We're also at gms@kera.org. I can't tell you how much I've looked forward to doing this.
Well, and everybody says virtually the same things about you.
This is going to be fun.
I hope so.
I hope so, too. How did you get into the business? When you went to college, were there such things as communications departments, or did you take one of those detours that people take in college?
Well, I went to the University of Michigan, and there was a place called Morris Hall, where a fellow by the name of Waldo Abbott was the professor, and he was also running the radio department. It wasn't a station. And for some reason, once I walked into Morris Hall, I knew just exactly what I wanted to be as soon as I could, and that's a radio announcer. That's all I had in mind. I wanted to be a radio announcer. I wanted to rip and read news. I was happy to do commercials. It never occurred to me that I would do interviews. It was heaven.
Right.
When I finally got a job. They turned me down in Muskegon, Michigan. I never understood why. So I went away to the National Music Camp, where a fellow by the name of Joe Maddie. Do you know about the National Music Camp?
No, I don't.
Interlochen.
Oh.
It was just wonderful. And while I was there, they said, hey, I got a call from Waldo Abbott saying, Myron, my name, get yourself down to WOOD in Grand Rapids. They're looking for $20 a week.
An announcer,
a radio announcer.
Right. Very good.
I went down, got the job, and I knew I was, I didn't want to go home, back to Boston, Brookline. You know, I went to grammar school with a fellow by the name of Jack Kennedy.
Yes.
Who was, the Kennedys lived about 5 doors away from the Wallaces, and we went to Edward Devotion School, which everybody thought was a Catholic school when they heard Edward Devotion, except that Edward Devotion rode his horse in a certain way while Paul Revere was riding his horse in another way. And the school system at Michigan, listen to me, the school system at Brookline was just first rate. I mean, really, it was a great little town to grow up in, and O'Connor and Goldberg town, you were either Irish or Jewish. And my folks had come from Russia, both of them, when they were young. So,
but the Kennedys got rich and moved out.
Eventually they did, yeah.
Yeah. We're skipping a few years here, but you wind up in New York in TV, and this guy gets an idea. Who is Ted Yates?
Ted Yates, and incidentally, I'm married to his widow.
Are you really?
Yes, yes. Ted Yates was a cowboy who, instead of winding up in a saddle, he wound up as a television producer. He, the bravest man I've ever known, the finest man imaginable. I mean, really. And he wound up eventually at NBC News, first as a producer. He started the David Brinkley Show as a producer, and then wound up eventually becoming a correspondent as well as a producer. And on the first day of the Six-Day War, he was shot through the forehead by an Israeli sharpshooter. He was on the Jordanian side of Jerusalem that time, first day back in 1967. And I I guess the Israeli sharpshooter, taking a look at the camera that he was working with, thought that was probably a gun, got him, leaving behind 3 boys who are now, of course, my stepsons.
And he had the idea for the late night show, right?
Well, we were doing, it was the first half-hour news show. First half-hour news show, maybe in America, I don't know. But it was from 11 to 11:30, and Ted said, hey, why don't we, look, we have an audience. Why don't we start interviewing people? And why don't we do something that with interviews that has not been done before? You know, interviews were pablum. Interviews were, and then I wrote, and then I sang, and so forth. We began to do a lot of research, began to write questions. A fellow by the name of Al Ramrus was the writer, and he would go out ahead of time to talk to some of the people that we were going to interview, to prepare questions for me, and it was all close-up. I used to smoke, so the smoke curled up between me and the camera, which and with the close-ups and the sharp light and the warts and all approach, it was an overnight hit in New York. And suddenly I was no longer anonymous.
Right. You were now famous.
Well,
notorious.
Better.
Yeah. One of your earlier shows involved, Stop the Presses, a controversy because of something the famous columnist Drew Pearson said. First of all, if you would describe the power of the literal press in those days, and then what this thing with Pearson was.
Well, the thing with Drew Pearson was that he said that JFK had not written Profiles in Courage.
The Pulitzer Prize-winning book.
Exactly. And he couldn't really quite remember the guy who he said had written it. And I said to him, you're saying, Drew, that JFK did not write Profiles in Courage. That's right. And you don't know who it was? Well, I'll well, he found out. It was Ted Sorensen, he said. Well, whether it was Sorensen or not, Jack Kennedy, my old friend when we were about 9 years old, got mad as the dickens, as you can understand.
Sure.
And he asked me to come on down to Washington. He was a senator. And take a look at his notes. And he showed me all kinds of notes. Well, remember, that was the time when Jack Kennedy was having trouble with his back. And he showed me all kinds of notes, and I didn't know what to think. I really didn't know what to think. And they were saying, Joe Kennedy said, hey, sue the bastard. That was me. I was working at ABC by then. Sue the bastard for $50 million. Sue the bastard, and so forth. Well, Clark Clifford was the attorney for the Kennedy family at the time, and he laughed about it. And he told me that Joe Kennedy had said that. The fact of the matter is that they were upset because young Jack was planning to run for president, and they didn't need a controversy. Finally, a historian by the name of Herbert Parmet, and he's a good historian, did a real research, and he found out, to his satisfaction, and I think to the general satisfaction, that it was not written by John F. Kennedy. Sure, he had some notes, but he was on his back and reading more than writing.
Right.
During
and Ted Sorensen really did write it.
Well,
or somebody did.
Somebody did, but likely Ted Sorensen was a fine writer. Sorensen, to this day, says that he had nothing to do with it, except some notes.
Right. Mike Wallace, my guest, he's in town for a talk tonight. It's going to be at 6:30 at Highland Park United Methodist Church. It is, strictly speaking, sold out, but we're told that There may be some tickets released at the last minute due to no-shows. If you want information, you can call 214-523-2270. That's 214-523-2270. His new book is a memoir called Between You and Me. Did you, how
Incidentally,
often...
that I understand that church is George W. Bush's home church.
How did I miss that?
I have no idea. Janet McLeod just told me that's where, when he's...
In town? Visiting?
Exactly.
How often do you go into interviews expecting somebody to be something that they turn out not to be? I ask because you write about interviewing, this would have been, I guess, in the 50s or early 60s. Arkansas Governor Oral Faubus. This was at the height of the beginning of the civil rights era.
Right.
And, you know, people would have expected a monster. And you found this guy who you say was measured and restrained, even though he was an ardent segregationist. How often is your mind changed about somebody once you talk to him?
I'll tell you what, I don't know how much you do ahead of time in the way of research or...
A fair amount.
You do?
Yeah.
And you have other people to help you? Good. By the time I sit down with somebody, I really do know a fair amount about those people. I really do. And so I am seldom surprised about what I learn as I go. What I try to do is to, I don't know how you do it, but I have a yellow pad, one of those lined yellow pads, and I sit down and write maybe 75 or 100 questions, because I've read everything I can find about them. I've watched if they've done a film or something of that sort, read a book, and I try to, what I do is I say, okay, fear, joy, ambition, greed, various categories, and wind up with maybe 100 questions. Big deal. What happens is that the person I'm talking to suddenly realizes, hey, this guy has done a lot of work ahead of time. I'm going to take him a little bit seriously. I'm going to help him. So we become co-conspirators. And what happens is that it becomes a chemistry, I like to say, a chemistry of confidentiality. It's what you're doing right now.
Sure.
What you're doing right now is you're looking at me, good-looking man, obviously. You're working closer to the mic than I am. But I'm looking at a man who has
done his homework.
That's basically.
Yeah. Mike Wallace, my guest. If you want to talk with him, 800-933-5372. We're also at GMS at KERA.org. Needless to say, we have lots of people already lined up. We'll take your calls. We'll talk some more with Mike. His new book is called Between You and Me, a memoir, right after this.
Talk about
Parish Episcopal School serves students in pre-kindergarten through 12th grade in a co-educational environment on two beautiful campuses located in the heart of North Dallas. Parish has offered an enriched academic community to its students for over 30 years. Parish will hold an open house on Saturday, November 12th from noon till 2 p.m. on the Midway campus located at the intersection of Midway and Alpha Road. More information at the school's website, parishepiscopal.org.
Hi, this is Glenn Mitchell. We're back at the downtown Dallas Public Library for a special live broadcast on Friday, November 11th at noon. First hour, anything you ever wanted to know. Second hour, Davey and Peter Rothbart from Found Magazine. They'll talk about their latest finds. Davey will talk about his brand new book, The Lone Surfer of Montana, Kansas. It's the Glenn Mitchell Show, live at the Dallas Public Library, Friday, November 11th at noon on KERA 90.1 Radio Unlimited.
You're listening to The Glenn Mitchell Show on KERA 90.1. Be sure to come out and celebrate the groundbreaking for the new Dallas Center for the Performing Arts tomorrow morning at 10:30 at 1800 Leonard Street in the heart of the Dallas Arts District. For more information about that, visit the events page of KERA.org. Currently in Dallas, it's 84 degrees. We have 75 in Tyler, 69 in Wichita Falls, 83 in Fort Worth.
Welcome back. Mike Wallace, my guest. The new book is called Between You and Me, a Memoir, and I've forgotten to mention something. There's also a DVD that goes along with it. Tell me about that.
Well, the DVD, it's 82 minutes worth of conversations that I've had with all kinds of people. The people I write about in the book, we've gotten permission from the various people. Some of the stuff I did years ago, Eleanor Roosevelt, Margaret Sanger, presidents, dictators, con men, and the best parts of some of those interviews are on in a little DVD in the back of the book.
That's great. I was going to ask, speaking of Margaret Sanger, you interviewed her, I guess, in New York in the 50s. I would have figured that even then she wasn't around, because I thought she lived a lot longer ago than that. How old was she when you talked to her? Do you remember?
She was not a youngster by any means. I interviewed her in 1958 on ABC on something then called the Mike Wallace interview.
Right.
And the reason that, can you believe contraception was against the law?
Right, of course.
Against the law in certain states. Connecticut, for instance.
Right.
There were a lot of lawbreakers in in Connecticut every night.
Right.
But what she did back then was to take on the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church was mad. And what she said, I've used the DVD of Eleanor Roosevelt. So I did her in 1957, also on ABC. But I'm going to get back to doing Margaret Sanger, because she was a fascinating, feisty woman, and angry. What do they know about? What do they know about families? What do they know about? You don't have to have a child every time she didn't say go to bed.
Yes,
but,
right. Before we get some calls, I have to ask you about something. Do I remember this correctly, that at some point in your distant past, you were a game show host? What was the game show?
Well, I did something called Majority Rules. I'm an old man now, and I have a little difficulty. No, I did everything.
Yeah.
I was an actor.
Really?
Of course.
This I didn't know. What were you in?
I was an actor on the first coaxial cable television show to come out of New York, called Stand By for Crime with Tony Kidd, played by me. I was on Broadway in a show called Reclining Figure. I was an idealistic young art dealer. The business of performance. What have you done besides this?
I've done TV news. I haven't acted, well, not counting, except for high school. But I've done different stuff, whatever comes along. Somebody calls up, especially when you're a freelancer.
Right.
Somebody calls up and says, can you do that? And even if you've never done it, you say, well, sure.
Absolutely. And when do I get paid?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what you did.
Yeah.
Whatever somebody said, can you do it? And you said, yeah.
That's exactly right.
Of course.
And it's a wonderful way to really broaden your scope and your understanding.
Yeah.
People hate to be called people. Sometimes people who are on the air, radio or television, don't like to be called performers. I'm not a performer, I'm a reporter.
That's nonsense. You're a performer.
That's exactly right. And it's not a dirty word by any mean. Some of the best, look, Edward R. Murrow was a superb performer. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had the voice for it. He had the demeanor for it. And some of the very best.
Cronkite's a performer. You're a performer.
Of course.
Yeah. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Let's get some calls, and we'll start with John in Dallas. Hi.
Yes, sir. as an 87-year-old with a presumed multi-generational perspective, how can you stand or understand this emphasis from communications, English, speech, journalism, PR, advertising majors, this attempt to circumscribe speech with this politically correct speech jihad? I mean, is it just the educated elites just trying to make a power grab to control ideas, or?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Look, there are so many outlets for speech. I don't know what you'd like to watch or listen to or whatever, but, I mean, come on, there are, with cable and radio and just plain broadcast, there's just so much. What are you missing?
He's gone, but I think maybe he was talking about the mainstream media. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Let's get a call from Annie in Dallas. Hi.
Hello?
Hey.
Oh, I've got two things. First of all, I always want to say that he reminds me of Upton Sinclair. And I wanted to ask him if he ever felt like he was Upton Sinclair when he went to do reports. The second question is, editing is so fabulous at 60 Minutes. What is your role in editing when you all have stories?
Well,
okay, we'll find out.
Of course. First of all, Upton Sinclair was he's a hero to every muckraking reporter imaginable. I mean, he was
the original.
That's correct.
Yeah.
As for how much we have to do with editing, each one of us on 60 Minutes has a bunch of producers. I am down to 2 now because I'm not doing very much. 6 to 8 pieces, 6 to 8 pieces a year, maybe 10 sometimes. Back in the old days, it was 25 or 30. But what happens is you and your producer are responsible. You may work for a month on a piece, bring it in, show it to, it used to be Don Hewitt, and now it's Jeff Fager. And you sit there in the screening room, and they take it apart in front of you. You'll bring in a 20-minute piece for something that's going to be 10 minutes, and you have a good deal to do with it yourself. And there is blood on the floor because the editors are sitting back in New York City, going home every night, and of course they're smarter than we are. But we have a good deal to do with the actual editing of it.
When you were doing 25 or 30 pieces a year, that's not 2-minute stories. Those were like 15-minute stories. How did you do that many stories in a year?
Well, what you do is, first of all, your producer does a lot of the work.
Right.
But I was working. I loved doing the job. I would be out of town, away from home, regularly 3-4 days a week for year after year after year. And because the audience got hooked, this was appointment television, particularly when we finally moved to Sunday nights. And it wasn't work. It was a joy. It wasn't particularly a joy for my succession of wives. But if you get caught up in the process of reporting,
you just do it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
You do it, and the audience is so satisfying because they're smart. They care about the news. We became a kind of ombudsman of sorts when we developed the investigation stuff that we did. And after a while, they even let us travel first class. Can you believe we used to have to bang around? Back in those days, the camera crews had it in their contract. They traveled first class.
The reporters food coach?
That's right. We would bang around in the back of the plane, and the camera people and sound men, would occasionally bring us a drink and some peanuts.
That's too funny. If you want to talk with Mike Wallace, we're at 800-933-5372. We're also at gms@kera.org. I just have this image of you and Morley Safer crammed into two little seats in the back of the plane.
That's right.
Let's get a call from Ken in Fort Worth. Hi.
Yeah, my pleasure to talk to you, Mike, and enjoyed you over the years.
Thank you, Ken.
I used to go to school, and I'd run home right after school, and I'd watch Joe McCarthy live.
Yes.
What were you doing at that time period?
1953.
Probably still in radio at that point, weren't you?
Yeah. I finally busted into television when I got out of the Navy in 1945, 6. But back in those days, I worked at WBKB in Chicago. Thought to myself, hey, I love radio. I don't have the demeanor. I can't be an anchor man. You know, I don't have that kind of face and personality, sort of a grouch to begin with. And I figured out, well, maybe I'll be able to carve out a little bit of this business for myself. And that's eventually exactly what happened.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the memoir is basically, as you say, about people you've interviewed and people that you either enjoyed or didn't enjoy. I have to ask you about a couple of them. Was Vladimir Horowitz as much fun as I imagine he was?
He was superb. I am an old fiddle player. I was the orchestra, not the orchestra, I was the...
concertmaster.
Thank you very much. I was the concertmaster of the Brookline High School Orchestra, played the fiddle, and was a reasonably good fiddle player. Loved music. Music was important to my sisters. And Vladimir Horowitz, I mean, this man was simply superb. Married to the daughter of Arturo Toscanini? I mean, come on. And I will never forget, when I walked into, I mean, he was just the dream to be able to interview. It's like interviewing Albert Einstein, only he was a musician.
Right.
He walked into Orchestra Hall in Chicago, where he was going to do a concert, and I looked, and I said, "Oh, Maestro, Mike Wallace, I watch you every Sunday." Can you imagine? And he was that way. He was kind of an adolescent. He had been through long depression. He didn't leave his house for 12 years when he was living there in a townhouse, I guess, on 92nd Street or something. But he enjoyed himself. He loved to play the piano. I mean, he loved to play the piano. And I remember so well, at the end of he was a patriot, former Russian, really a patriot. And he played Stars and Stripes forever. In Central Park, I believe it was, at the end of World War II. And I asked him to play it for me. And he said, "Oh, I can't. I don't remember. I can't play it for you." So Wanda, his wife, Arturo Toscanini's daughter, was sitting down there. He was henpecked. I mean, he was henpecked. So we went back and forth. I can't play it. I don't know how, etc., etc. She says, "Play." He played.
Of course.
And he was a joy.
And a real showman. I saw him once.
Did you?
He played in Dallas at the end of his career, and he was playing Scarlatti and Chopin. And he had there was this, I forget which one it was, but there's this long run from the bottom of the keyboard to the top. And on the way up, his left hand keeps playing. His right hand takes the handkerchief out of his coat pocket, mops his brow, puts it back, hand goes back to the keyboard.
That's right.
That's a showman.
That's exactly
And he knew exactly what he was doing.
Of course he did.
Yeah. Sure, we have time for this. Let's get a call from Steve in Fort Worth. Hi.
Hi, it's a very deep honor to be able to ask you a question. I wonder what you think, the cliche dumbing down, what's the status on that, and where do you see it going?
Dumbing down?
Yes.
There's an awful lot of it going on in the coverage of television news, for instance, and the coverage done by television news. The Suits are more interested now in money and budget. That doesn't mean that... Look, the qualities of CBS News was the Tiffany of the Tiffany Network. And Bill Paley, when he ran the Tiffany Network, really cared deeply about it. He made a lot of money, of course, and... But little by little, it seems to me, and to a certain degree it's competition, how much do you really want to know about Scott Peterson and Lacey Peterson and that kind of, forgive me, crap? There's an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
Much too much of that, it seems to me.
Well, 60 Minutes has proved over the years that people care about hard news.
Damn right.
And in-depth stories.
And it remains. It remains a very good broadcast. I noticed, I picked up the paper this morning, and we finished, I don't know, 10, 12 for the week. It remains a good broadcast.
To Bren in Dallas. Hi.
Hello, Mr. Wallace. How are you?
Hi. How are you?
Fine. I'm founder-director of Foundation for Behavioral Sensibilities, and what I admire is...
Founder and director of what?
Foundation for Behavioral Sensibilities. I teach social skills, communication skills, life skills, and in other words known as business etiquette. But what I admire is the tone and the pace and the pausing. I can actually hear you thinking. And these skills have been lost in interviews today. And how do you feel and how do you cope with that attitude of a fast-paced inability to really get out what you want to say?
I tell you something. You're absolutely right. There's too much fast talk. But having said that, there are interviewers, for instance, like Ted Koppel, the best, Barbara Walters, Larry King. You know, he used to be the softball king. He's superb at what he does. He gets very important, interesting people to talk to him. And when you do that day for day, night for night, for as many years as he's been doing it, Charlie Rose the same. There's a lot of good talk on radio and television in this country. Yeah. Seems to me.
Mike Wallace, my guest. The new book with a DVD is called Between You and Me, a memoir. He's going to be at Highland Park United Methodist Church tonight at 7 o'clock. It's technically sold out, but if 20 or 30 people want to give it a run, you know, there might be some return tickets, so get in line and hope. We'll be right back.
The Deep in the Arts calendar for Wednesday includes singer-songwriters, a synthetic-inspired artist, and Italian opera. The Living Opera presents Puccini's Johnny Schicchi at the Courtyard Theater in Plano. The singer-songwriter crowd will definitely want to check out Susan Gibson and Alex Whitmore at McHenry's in Fort Worth. Former Mad TV cast member Pablo Francisco hits the Addison Improv. Practicing attorney and award-winning author Scott Turow leads the Writers' Studio lecture going on at SMU's Karcher Hall. Also at SMU and the Hughes Trigg Center, celebrate romance and African-American literature in the presentation, A Time for Love. New York artist Christopher Priori delivers an art talk at the MAC. And the Bathhouse Cultural Center hosts the Wingspan Theater Company's run of the John Patrick Shanley play, Danny and the Deep Blue Sea. For these and other events, go to the radio page of KERA.org. For Deep in the Arts, I'm Jean Mascoro.
The Dallas Museum of Art invites you to their latest exhibition, Dialogues, Duchamp, Cornell, Johns, Rauschenberg. Featuring 4 of the most important and influential artists of the 20th century, this exhibition will challenge, entertain, and engage you in a thought-provoking artistic dialogue. With so many ideas in motion, you are advised to enter at your own risk. Dialogues, only at the Dallas Museum of Art. Now through January 8th. Details at dallasmuseumofart.org.
I'm Ed Gordon. Later today on News and Notes. The race to elect Detroit's next mayor is between incumbent Kwame Kilpatrick and challenger Freeman Hendricks. We'll hear from the winner and his plans for reviving the nation's poorest city. That's later today on News and Notes from NPR News.
Tonight at 8 on KERA 90.1 Radio Unlimited.
Welcome back. Mike Wallace, my guest. His book is called Between You and Me, a Memoir. And along with the book, you get a DVD of interviews that he's done over many years. I want to go back to the book for a second. There's a wonderful section of the book called Valentines, which is basically Mike and hot chicks. If we could pick any one of them, I want to talk about Tina Turner, because the section about her begins, I managed to make it through the first 78 years of my life without ever attending a rock concert, and I was serenely confident I could continue to avoid that dubious pleasure.
Right.
Well, you didn't, because you were going to interview her. Tell me about Tina Turner.
I tell you, I fell in love with her.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe, for some reason, I didn't know that much. I really...
You just sort of drew the assignment, basically, for her, right?
Well, actually, I think, what happened was that Ed Bradley was supposed to do her, I believe, and he was off in Burma. And as a result... That's
a legitimate excuse.
He was off in Burma on doing a story, and and I showed up, and she was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and... there was something. Now, you're going to be kind to me, she says. Well, of course I'm going to be kind to you. Now, come on. And she was a Buddhist.
Uh-huh.
And she began to... I tell you, she absolutely charmed me so much that I went back about, a couple of years later to do it again, because she is a glorious, glorious person. When she... and Ike Turner were together. And she was a little colored girl from Nutbush, Tennessee. And he used to whomp her. When I read the story of how he used to beat up on her and so forth, I found it difficult to believe. But she knew how to... Well, first of all, she had some surgery done in order to... But she remained... And I said, you know something, you live in a white world, don't you? I mean, you like Europe better than the United States. You live with a white guy. The bands that you play, by and large, are... Well, she said, yeah. You know something? And she used the... I'm reluctant to use the word. She used the N-word. She said, I was a nigger. You know, that didn't bother me. Didn't occur to me to worry about that. And for some reason, I believed her. She is a genuine delight. It's funny, as I think back, my God, she was a good-looking woman. And those legs.
Yes. At the other end of the happiness spectrum, since you write about it, we should talk about William Westmoreland.
Yes.
This wasn't a 60-minute report. It was a CBS Report story.
An hour and a half.
The Uncounted Enemy, A Vietnam Deception. What was the story, and why did it cause such a problem?
It caused a problem because we were getting our head handed to us by the VC there, and thousands and thousands of young Americans were dying over there, and the war was not popular, obviously. We got out in beyond our depth out there. So, General William Westmoreland decided, it's hard to believe that he would make up this kind of lie, but he made up the lie that there were only 300,000 enemy out there. He established a ceiling, 300,000. And a fellow by the name of Sam Adams, who worked for the CIA, got hold of documents and spent a long time out there proving that there were 600,000 enemy. Well, Westmoreland kept with that 300,000 number, and I had to believe that Lyndon Johnson was going along with it, lying to the American people, because if all of a sudden we Americans were faced with twice as many enemy out there as we had been told, we probably would have said, we're not going to... So, we put the piece on the air, and like a damn fool, William Westmoreland sued us, sued CBS, All Concerned, and me for $120 million. And suddenly I was in a cold and drafty federal courtroom in New York City being called, because the plaintiff, in this case Westmoreland, gets the first shot, being called liar, cheat, fraud, reporter who doesn't tell the truth, etc., etc. And I tell you, when that kind of thing happens, and the courtroom was full every day for this confrontation, if you will, and little by little I began to feel, hey, I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep and I was having trouble. Could I conceivably have been wrong about this? And, you know, you begin to doubt yourself. And my wife said, Mary said, hey, that's Ted Yates's widow, said, look, you're in a depression. Oh, no, I'm not in a depression. And I went to my doctor, and the doctor said, Mike, it's bad for your image to be told that you are some kind of wimp.
Right.
Depressed.
We should point out the trial went on for 4 months. I don't think the O.J. trial went on for 4 months. This dragged on and on and
day
on.
After day after day of being called nasty names. So I finally wound up with a fellow by the name of Marvin Kaplan, who was a psychiatrist. And he didn't really know what I did. He boned up. And he said, well, I tell you what, it's still Dr. Kaplan and Mr. Wallace, and it's 24 years later when I go to see him for lube jobs or something of that sort. And he said, look, you've got to be ready. You ask tough questions from people. Well, that's the kind of thing you've got to be able to answer in front of that jury, because the plaintiff is going to try to take you apart. And what they do in that kind of a trial, they try to diminish you. They try to destroy your reputation. They go into your background. Have you ever been involved with a libel trial?
Fortunately, no.
Good. You're right. In any case, he said, and besides that, you've got to get ready to lose. I said, what are you talking about, Dr. Kaplan? Well, because if you lose, you're going to think that you're going to want to kill yourself because your credibility is gone as far as your integrity, everything that you've worked for, etc., etc. Well, it was tough. I mean, really, people know. People who are listening, some of them have faced it, or people they know have faced it, and it gets really, I mean, it's the bottom of the barrel. It's, in any case, I didn't have to testify. I was taking an antidepressant at the time called Ludiamil, which made your hand shake and made your throat and your front and your back dry. So I could just see sitting 5 yards away from the jury with my hand shaking and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Finally, he pulled out. We didn't have to take back a word. He saw in order for him to withdraw the suit, we didn't have to, not a penny. And it was very expensive for both him and CBS. Conservatives were, of course, with him. You know something? When you get to be this old, every once in a while, you lose your way. I mean,
Well, you know what? There's a remedy for that.
And that is?
Phone calls. Sam in Grand Prairie. Good afternoon. Hey, Sam.
Good afternoon. Yes, this is Sam.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thanks for talking with Michael. I just wanted to find out what your impression is about Dan Rather and the way CBS, just let him go.
All right, we'll ask. Thank you.
CBS didn't let him go.
Yeah, he's still there, right?
Of course. He's still on 60 Minutes, as a matter of fact. You know who thought that CBS had done that to him? Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, said, well, come on. You're constantly talking about censorship here in Russia. Dan Rather was let go. Where he got that information, I don't know. Look, Rather and his team put together a piece about George W. Bush's National Guard service. There were some flaws in it. And Rather suffered because of it. Mm-hmm. I had a discussion with Dan about it. I said, look, everybody was fired. Vice presidents were fired, and the people who worked with you on the piece fired. Did it never occur to you that perhaps you should